when the lifeless body of a dog collapsed on my doorstep. I thought I was rescuing a lost soul. Little did I know, I was stepping into a deadly game of survival, betrayal, and redemption. What started as a desperate plea for help in the middle of a raging blizzard would uncover a horrifying secret buried deep in the woods and change my life forever. You know that feeling when the world goes silent, just before something life-changing happens? That's what it was like that night. The storm was howling, the snow piling up against the cabin. And yet, something felt off. I couldn't shake the unease. Like the storm wasn't the only thing outside. I had just settled into my chair, a steaming mug of coffee in hand, when it started. Scratch, scratch. At first, I thought it was the wind, out here in the mountains. Strange noises come with the territory. But then it came again, louder this time, and it wasn't just scratching. It was a whine, low, desperate, like someone or something pleading for help. That's when I froze. Now, if you've ever lived alone in the middle of nowhere, you know the rules. You don't open the door for just anything. It's the kind of instinct that keeps you alive. But this wasn't just anything. This was different. I set the coffee down, the warmth already forgotten, and reached for the flashlight. The cabin creaked under my steps as I made my way to the door. The scratching stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that only made my pulse pound harder. I hesitated with my hand on the doorknob. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to stay safe and warm. But then the sound came again, scratch, scratch, whimper, and suddenly, couldn't ignore it. I opened the door. The wind hit me like a slap, flinging snow into the cabin and snatching the breath from my lungs. At first, I didn't see anything, just white. Then my flashlight found it. A German shepherd standing on my porch. No, not standing. Barely standing. Its fur was matted with snow and blood, its ribs jutting out sharply beneath the thin coat. Its eyes met mine, wide and desperate, and then it collapsed, its legs giving out like they'd been holding on to nothing but willpower. I stared for a moment, frozen by the sight. What kind of hell had this animal been through? And why had it come here? To me, in the middle of a storm? The questions didn't matter. Not right then. Instinct kicked in. I dropped the flashlight, knelt down, and scooped the dog into my arms. His body was ice cold, lighter than it should have been, and it wasn't moving except for the faint, uneven rise and fall of its chest. "You're okay now," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if it was true. The words felt hollow, but they were all I had. I kicked the door shut behind me, sealing out the storm, and carried the dog to the fire. It didn't stir as I wrapped it in a blanket, its breathing shallow and labored. My hands shook as I worked, warming its paws, rubbing its fur, trying to bring it back to life. Every scar I found on its body told a story I wasn't ready to hear. Deep gashes, burns, old wounds that had healed into jagged reminders of pain. What kind of monster could do this to a creature like this? For a moment, I thought I was too late. Its chest barely moved, and its eyes stayed closed. "Come on," I whispered, my voice breaking. "Stay with me." And then, a miracle. The dog's ears twitched, just slightly, but it was enough. Its eyes fluttered open for a heartbeat, locking onto mine with a look I'll never forget. Gratitude, fear, hope. Then they closed again, and the dog let out a soft, tired whimper. I sat there, my hand on its side, feeling the faint rhythm of its breathing. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside, it was just me and this dog, two survivors, thrown together by something bigger than chance. And as I stared at it, lying there by the fire, one thought kept running through my mind. It didn't find me by accident. Something or someone had sent it here, and whatever it was, this was just the beginning. The night pressed on, but sleep was out of the question. The German shepherd, fragile yet powerful in its presence, lay curled by the fire, its chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. I sat nearby, nursing a second cup of coffee, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Where had it come from? What had it endured to end up here? At my doorstep, In the middle of a deadly storm, the fire crackled softly, filling the room with warmth. But outside, the blizzard howled like a warning, as if the storm itself was trying to hide the truth. I couldn't shake the feeling that something or someone had driven this dog to my cabin, and as much as I wanted to convince myself it was a coincidence, deep down, I knew better. There's no such thing as chance when desperation is involved. The dog stirred slightly, its ears twitching as if catching a sound I couldn't hear. I leaned forward, careful not to startle it. "Hey, buddy," I whispered, my voice barely more than a breath. "You're safe now. I've got you." Its eyes opened for a fleeting moment, those deep, soulful eyes that seemed to hold an entire world of pain and resilience. And then, they closed again, as if trusting me enough to let its guard down. That trust, it hit me harder than I expected. For all the scars on its body, it hadn't given up. Not yet. The snow lashed against the windows, the wind a relentless roar outside. I checked the clock, almost midnight. That's when I heard it. Another sound, softer this time, barely audible over the storm, but unmistakable. Scratch. Whimper. My heart sank. Could it be? I rose from the chair, my body tense, every instinct on high alert. Grabbing the flashlight, I moved to the door, careful not to disturb the sleeping shepherd. The storm was fierce, but I couldn't ignore the faint cries that now seemed to come in waves. Taking a steadying breath, I opened the door. The wind hit me like a freight train, snow swirling into the cabin. But my eyes locked on the small figure trembling at the edge of the porch. It was another dog, smaller, younger, a border collie mix. By the looks of it, its fur was soaked and frosted, his body shaking so violently it could barely stand. I crouched down, extending a hand. "Easy there," I said softly, trying to coax it forward. "It's okay. You're safe." The little dog hesitated, its wide eyes darting between me and the storm behind it. But then, as if sensing the warmth spilling from the cabin, took one unsteady step, then another, before collapsing just inches from my hand. Without thinking, I scooped it up, cradling its fragile body against my chest. It was so cold, I could feel the chill through my coat. Inside, the German shepherd stirred as I laid the smaller dog beside it. There was a moment, a heartbeat, when the shepherd lifted its head, its eyes locking onto the newcomer. Recognition flickered there, and then something more. The shepherd shifted, curling protectively around the smaller dog, as if to say, "You're safe now. I've got you." I sat back, watching this unspoken exchange, my throat tightening. These two, they weren't just strays. They were family, and whatever had brought them here wasn't over. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story, I want to connect with you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop your country's flag in the comments below. And if you've ever felt that indescribable bond with an animal, hit that like button, because what happens next might just make you believe in the power of love, loyalty, and survival. The storm outside began to subside, but the questions in my mind only grew louder. These dogs hadn't stumbled here by chance. They had escaped from something or someone, and if I was right, their story wasn't finished. It was just beginning. The storm finally began to weaken as dawn approached, leaving the cabin shrouded in an eerie stillness. Outside, the relentless wind had faded to a whisper, but inside, the warmth of the fire battled the icy chill that lingered in the air. The two dogs slept close to each other now, their bodies wrapped in the blankets I'd given them. The younger one, still trembling slightly, rested its head against the larger shepherd's side, as if the connection between them was the only thing keeping it grounded. I stood by the window, staring out into the expanse of white. The snow had piled high, burying the porch and erasing any signs of the tracks they might have left behind. But I couldn't ignore the thought gnawing at me. Where had they come from? And more importantly, what were they running from? Behind me, the shepherd stirred, its ears twitching before its head lifted slowly. It looked toward the door, its eyes alert and scanning, as though it expected someone or something to burst through at any moment. A low, guttural growl rumbled from its throat. I turned, instinctively gripping the edge of the windowsill. "What is it, girl?" I whispered, stepping closer. The dog didn't take its eyes off the door, its body tense. The smaller dog stirred but didn't wake, its frail form shifting slightly as the shepherd shifted protectively around it. The growl subsided, but the tension in the room remained palpable. I checked the door, ensuring it was locked and secure, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was preparing for. The storm had hidden everything, muffling the world outside in layers of snow. If there had been any tracks left behind by whoever or whatever these dogs had escaped from, they were gone now, but that didn't mean the danger wasn't still out there. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the room. I threw on my coat, boots, and gloves, knowing I couldn't sit idle while questions churned in my mind. The dogs would be safe here, at least for a little while. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out into the frigid air, determined to find answers. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I moved around the cabin, scanning the area for any clues. For a while, there was nothing but a smooth blanket of white, unbroken and serene. But as I ventured farther from the cabin, my breath caught. 2 faint trails of paw prints appeared, leading from the edge of the forest to my porch. They were partially buried now, but still visible. And then there was the other set of tracks, a third trail, human footprints, heavy and deliberate, leading to the same place. They stopped just short of the porch and veered back toward the woods. A chill that had nothing to do with the weather crept up my spine. I crouched to examine the prints, noticing how deep they were, like whoever had made them had been carrying something or perhaps struggling with something. The snow around the footprints was disturbed, scuffed and uneven. My eyes followed the trail as it disappeared into the shadowed tree line, and I felt the pull of curiosity tempered with a growing sense of dread. What had driven these dogs through such a brutal storm? And who had been following them so closely? The forest was unnervingly quiet, the kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you question every step. The snow crunched beneath my boots as I followed the faint trail of human footprints disappearing into the shadows of the trees. My breath fogged in the freezing air, each exhale a reminder of the storm's lingering grip. The tracks were erratic, zigzagging at points, doubling back at others, like whoever made them wasn't moving with confidence but with desperation. Or fear. The German shepherd's paw prints stayed close to the human tracks. And just behind, the smaller paw prints of the collie. I couldn't help but wonder, were they being led? Or were they being chased? And why did the track stop at my cabin only to turn back into the woods? As I moved deeper into the trees, the air grew colder, heavier, as though the forest itself didn't want me there. My flashlight swept over branches weighed down by snow, their skeletal fingers brushing against each other in the breeze. Then I saw it, a small clearing up ahead. The snow disturbed and packed down in strange patterns. My pulse quickened. In the center of the clearing stood a lone tree, its bark scarred with deep gashes as if someone or something had hacked at it. Around its base, the snow was littered with scraps, a frayed piece of rope, a tattered blanket, and something darker, blood. I knelt down, brushing the snow away from the stains. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either. Nearby, I found the remains of a trap, a crude mechanism with jagged teeth, its rusted edges smeared with dried crimson. My stomach turned. The dogs had come through here, and they'd suffered for it. The wind carried a faint sound, almost like a voice, low and indistinct, coming from deeper in the woods. I stood, every muscle in my body tensing. Was it the storm playing tricks? Or was someone really out there? I shone my flashlight in the direction of the sound, and that's when I saw it, a set of newer tracks, cutting across the clearing and heading toward the thickest part of the forest. The tracks were unmistakably human, but something about them felt off. They were uneven, like the person had been limping, or dragging something behind them. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I followed the trail, my heart pounding in my chest. The German shepherd's growl from earlier echoed in my mind. What had it sensed? The deeper I went, the more suffocating the forest became. The trees grew closer together, their shadows twisting in the beam of my light. The ground here was rougher, less blanketed by snow, revealing broken branches and churned up earth. Then, just ahead, I caught sight of a structure small, dilapidated, and almost swallowed by the trees. A shed. It was barely standing, its wooden planks warped and rotting. The roof sagged under the weight of the snow, and the windows were black with grime. The door hung slightly ajar, creaking as the wind teased it back and forth. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to move closer. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back. But I had to know. The air around the shed felt colder, sharper, as if the place itself was repelling me. I pushed the door open with the tip of my boot, the hinges groaning in protest. The smell hit me first, stale, damp, with an underlying metallic tang. My flashlight illuminated the interior, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Cages lined the far wall, their metal bars rusted and bent in places. Most were empty, but a few still held traces of their former occupants. Tufts of fur caught in the corners, gnawed bones scattered across the floor. Nearby, a makeshift table was cluttered with tools, chains, muzzles, and what looked like a branding iron. My stomach twisted. This wasn't just a shed. It was a prison. In the center of the room lay a chain, its links heavy and broken. I crouched down, picking up a piece of the chain. It was still warm to the touch. Someone had been here recently. The thought sent a chill down my spine. I moved to the table, my eyes scanning the scattered objects. Among the chaos was a small notebook, its leather cover cracked and worn. I opened it, the pages stiff with age, and began to read. The entries were short, clinical, and utterly horrifying. Subject number 5, male, strong build, aggressive tendencies, sold. Subject number 9, female, injured in transport, unfit for sale, terminated. The words blurred as rage and nausea boiled in my chest. This wasn't just cruelty, it was calculated, systematic. My hands shook as I turned the pages, each entry more chilling than the last. Then I found it. Subject number 13, German Shepherd, female, high endurance, escaped during storm, raven. The air in the shed seemed to press down on me, heavy and suffocating. I slammed the notebook shut, my breath coming in shallow gasps. This place, these people, had been using these dogs for something unspeakable. And Raven, along with the collie, had fought to escape. But from what? Or worse, from who? A sound behind me snapped me out of my thoughts. It was faint, a soft rustle of snow, but it was enough to set every nerve in my body on edge. I turned, my flashlight cutting through the darkness outside the shed. For a moment, there was nothing but the silent expanse of trees. Then, just at the edge of the beam, I saw it movement, a shadow. Someone or something was watching me. The shadow lingered at the edge of the light, unmoving yet unmistakably there. My breath hitched as I instinctively tightened my grip on the flashlight. Its trembling beam, the only thing keeping the encroaching darkness at bay. For a moment, neither of us moved. The shed creaked faintly in the cold, a stark reminder of just how isolated I was. And then the shadow shifted, slow, deliberate steps crunching softly through the snow. "Who's there?" My voice was firm, though my heart pounded like a drum. No answer. The figure stopped just beyond the clearing, the faint outline of a hooded figure barely visible through the swirling snow. They were watching me, no doubt about it. I took a cautious step forward, the beam of my flashlight shaking slightly as it searched for detail, for anything that might give me an edge. And then, as suddenly as they appeared, the figure turned and melted into the woods. Every instinct told me to let them go, to turn back to the cabin and lock the door behind me. But the notebook in my hand, the damning evidence of what had happened to Raven and the other dogs, was too heavy to ignore. Whoever they were, they knew this place, and they had likely seen me. If I didn't find answers now, I might not get another chance. I tucked the notebook into my coat and followed the footprints left in the snow. Each step a battle between reason and recklessness. The forest seemed to close in around me, the thick canopy of branches overhead swallowing what little light remained. My flashlight flickered for a moment, and my stomach dropped. Not now, I muttered, smacking the side of it until the beam steadied again. The tracks wound deeper into the woods, zigzagging erratically as though the person was unsure of where they were going, or maybe trying to confuse anyone following them. I pressed on, my breath fogging in the frigid air, every nerve in my body on high alert. Then, through the trees, I saw it, a faint glow, not the pale light of dawn or the reflection of snow, but the warm, flickering light of a fire. My pace quickened, but I stayed low, weaving between the trunks as I approached. The glow grew brighter until the source came into view, a small campsite, hastily assembled, with a dying fire at its center. There was no one there. I scanned the area, my eyes darting from the tent to the scattered supplies strewn haphazardly around the clearing. A rusted chain lay coiled near the fire pit, and next to it, a knife glinted faintly in the dim light. My pulse quickened as I stepped closer, trying to piece together what had happened here. The tent flap stirred slightly in the breeze, and I froze. Someone was inside. My fingers itched to grab the knife, but I knew better than to provoke a confrontation without knowing what, or who, I was up against. "Show yourself," I called, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. For a moment, there was nothing but the crackle of the fire and the whisper of the wind. Then the tent flap shifted again, and a figure emerged. It was a man, his face shadowed beneath the hood of a heavy jacket. He wasn't tall, but his build was solid, his posture radiating an unsettling confidence. He held his hands up slightly, palms outward, as though to placate me. "Relax," he said, his voice rough and low. "I don't want any trouble." "Funny," I shot back, gesturing to the chain and knife. "Looks like trouble's all you've got." The man smirked, though there was no humor in his expression. He took a step forward, and I instinctively raised the flashlight higher, its beam catching his face for the first time. He was older than I expected, his weathered skin marked with scars that hinted at a violent past. His eyes, cold and calculating, locked onto mine. "Let me guess," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You're here about the dogs." My stomach churned, but I held my ground. "What did you do to them?" The man chuckled darkly, shaking his head. "You have no idea what you've walked into, do you? Those dogs," he paused, his smirk fading into something darker. "They're not your problem. They're not yours either." I snapped, the anger in my voice surprising even me. "I've seen what you did to them. I've got proof." "That?" His expression hardened. "Proof?" His gaze flicked to my coat, and I realized too late that he knew. "You've got the book." The man moved faster than I expected, lunging for me before I could react. I stumbled back, narrowly dodging his grasp as the flashlight slipped from my hand and hit the snow with a dull thud. Darkness swallowed the clearing, save for the faint glow of the dying fire. Blindly, I reached for the knife by the fire pit, my fingers closing around the cold steel just as he grabbed my arm. His grip was like iron, and I twisted desperately, managing to wrench free and put a few feet of distance between us. "You don't know what you're messing with," he growled, his voice filled with venom. "Walk away, now." "Not a chance," I shot back, gripping the knife tightly. "I'm taking this to the authorities. Your little operation is over." He laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "You think you're the first do-gooder to try and stop us? You're in over your head, kid." Before I could respond, a sharp bark pierced the night, followed by the unmistakable sound of snow crunching under paws. Relief flooded through me as Raven emerged from the shadows, her golden eyes blazing with fury. She charged at the man, her growl low and menacing, and he stumbled back, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Call her off," he spat, raising his hands defensively. "She's not the one you should be afraid of," I said, my voice cold. Raven stopped just short of him, her teeth bared and her growl vibrating through the air. For a moment, the man hesitated, glancing between me and the dog as if calculating his odds. Then, without another word, he bolted, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there, my breath coming in ragged gasps, as Raven returned to my side. Her tail wagged faintly, but her eyes never left the shadows where the man had vanished. She was still on guard, and so was I. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. As we made our way back to the cabin, the notebook tucked securely inside my coat, one question burned in my mind. How far would these people go to protect their secret? The cabin was quiet when Raven and I returned. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that comforted. It was the kind that pressed down on you. Heavy and unrelenting, the fire had burned low, casting flickering shadows across the walls. The smaller dog, now curled tightly on the rug, lifted her head as we entered. Her eyes darted to Raven, who padded over to nuzzle her reassuringly. Even after everything, Raven's protective instinct never wavered. I locked the door behind us, sliding the bolt into place and checking it twice. My mind was still racing with what had just happened in the woods. The man's words echoed in my head. "You don't know what you've walked into." He wasn't just bluffing. This operation, whatever it was, wasn't small. And if they were willing to hurt animals so brutally, what else were they capable of? The notebook sat on the table, its battered leather cover illuminated by the dim light. Felt heavier than it looked, as though it carried the weight of every scar etched into Raven's body. I flipped it open again, scanning the entries with a growing sense of dread. The dogs weren't just victims, they were products, treated like inventory in a cruel, calculated system. I paused on an entry toward the back, the handwriting shakier than the rest. Shipment delayed. Shepherd female escaped with smaller dog. Suspect interference. Will retrieve soon. My stomach tightened. Will retrieve soon. The words felt like a warning. Promise that they weren't done yet. And now that I had the notebook, I'd become part of the equation. Raven's low growl broke the silence, pulling me from my thoughts. She was standing by the window, her ears pinned back and her body tense. I crossed the room, careful not to make a sound, and peered through the frost-covered glass. At first, all I saw was darkness, the snow glinting faintly under the pale moonlight. But then movement. A shadow flitted between the trees, too fast and too deliberate to be the wind. "They're watching us," I muttered, my voice barely audible. Raven's growl deepened, a primal sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I grabbed the phone and dialed the authorities, my fingers shaking as I pressed the buttons. The dispatcher's voice on the other end was calm, but her words weren't what I wanted to hear. The storm had delayed emergency services, and it would be hours before anyone could reach me. Hours I wasn't sure we had. "They're coming back," I whispered, staring out into the darkness. "They want the dogs, and I wasn't going to let them have them." I moved quickly, securing the cabin as best I could. The windows were locked, the door reinforced with whatever heavy furniture I could drag into place. My hands trembled as I loaded the shotgun I kept for emergencies, every click of the chamber echoing loudly in the silent room. I wasn't a violent person, but I'd learned the hard way that sometimes survival leaves you no choice. The dogs stayed close, sensing the tension in the air. Raven's eyes never left the window, while the smaller dog clung to her side, trembling but silent. I knelt down beside them, resting a hand on each of their heads. "I don't know what's coming," I said softly, my voice cracking, "but I promise you, I'm not letting anyone hurt you again." The hours dragged on, each minute stretching into an eternity. Every creak of the cabin, every gust of wind outside felt like a prelude to something worse. Then, just past midnight, it happened. The sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, crunched through the snow outside. My heart pounded as I moved to the window, peeking through a small gap in the curtain. There were two of them this time, their figures barely visible in the moonlight. One carried a flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness as they approached the cabin. Raven let out a sharp bark. Her body pressed against the door as if daring them to try. The men stopped, the flashlight's beam landing on the door for a moment before sweeping across the windows. I could feel the weight of their presence, the menace in their movements. They weren't here to talk. "Stay back," I whispered to the dogs, though I doubted Raven had any intention of listening. The first man reached the door, his gloved hand gripping the handle. He jiggled it, testing the lock. When it didn't budge, he stepped back, motioning to the second man, who began circling the cabin, likely looking for another way in. My pulse raced. They were trying to find a weakness, point of entry. I didn't wait for them to succeed. Before I could think twice, I threw the door open, shotgun in hand, and leveled it at the first man. He froze, his flashlight beam jerking upward to illuminate my face. "Step away," I said, my voice cold and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The man smirked, raising his hands mockingly. "Easy there. We're just here for what's ours." "You mean the dogs?" I tightened my grip on the gun. "They're not yours, and you're not taking them." His smirk faded, replaced by something darker. "You don't know who you're messing with." "I don't care," I snapped. "Get off my property." The second man reappeared, his shadow looming behind the first. "We could make this easy," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You give us the dogs, and we walk away. No one gets hurt. Accept them." I shot back, nodding toward the cabin. "I've seen what you do. You think I'm letting them go back to that?" The men exchanged a glance, and I saw it, the decision. They weren't leaving without a fight. Before they could act, Raven burst through the door, her growl ripping through the night like a warning shot. She lunged at the first man, teeth bared, and he stumbled back, dropping the flashlight. The beam spun wildly, casting frantic shadows across the snow. The second man reached for something, probably a weapon, but I didn't give him the chance. "Get out," I shouted, raising the shotgun higher. "You take one more step, and I swear." A distant sound cut through the chaos. Sirens. Faint, but unmistakable. The men froze, their confidence crumbling as the realization hit. Help was coming, and they were out of time. The first man cursed under his breath, shoving the second. "Let's go." They retreated into the woods, their figures swallowed by the shadows. I stood there, the shotgun still raised, until the sound of their footsteps faded completely. Only then did I lower it, my arms trembling with the weight of everything that had just happened. Raven returned to my side, her tail wagging faintly as if to say, "We did it." I dropped to my knees, wrapping my arms around her and the smaller dog, who had crept out to join us. "It's over," I whispered, though I wasn't entirely sure if it was true. "You're safe now." When the authorities arrived, I handed over the notebook and told them everything. They assured me the men would be found, that the operation would be shut down for good. But as they drove away, leaving me alone once more in the quiet of the cabin, I knew this wasn't just about the dogs. This was about second chances, mine, theirs, and maybe even the chance to finally find peace. Raven and the little one, now named Luna, stayed by my side as the sun rose, casting the forest in a pale, golden light. For the first time in years, I felt something I hadn't in a long time: hope. Sometimes, the ones who need saving the most are the ones who end up saving you. Thank you for staying with me through this incredible journey. If you were as captivated by this story as I was while sharing it, I'd love to hear your thoughts. If you thought the story was amazing, drop a 2 in the comments. But if you feel there's room for improvement, leave a 7. I value your honest feedback. And don't forget to subscribe to Tapestry of Worlds for more stories that touch your heart and keep you on the edge of your seat. Your support helps us bring more tales of courage, loyalty, and the human connection to life. Hit that subscribe button and join this growing community where every story weaves a new world.